Okay,
We're gonna get started.
we're going to get started. So obviously, I'd like for you guys to turn the first few pages of the buyer broker agreement are just, it's your agency, it's different advisories. That stuff you guys are all normal, used to. So we're not going to really go into that. We're going to go over the 3-page buyer broker agreement, formerly known as the BRBC. And I've taken this class with several different people over the past few weeks. It's a very boring class. So instead of going line by line and deep diving into it, we don't have the time for that. That would be a 2-hour class. I'm going to share with you guys the information I find is very important that could find you guys. If you don't know it, if you're not filling it out correctly, you're not going to get paid, or there could be a problem in getting paid. So the first page of the buyer broker agreement is the most important. Obviously, at the very top, you're going to put your buyer's name in, you're going to put the brokerage name in. This is a little different than the RLA. So when you guys have a listing agreement, you put the start date and then you have an actual end date. The difference here is you're going to go by days. So you have your starting date today. If you're meeting with a buyer, it's beginning on April 9th and ending on, you would put 60 days, 30 days, 1 day, 5 days, 7 days. It's not like a count. It's not like from April 8th to April 8th, 2025. You're going to put in days there. Right now, when people are using this buyer broker agreement, they're leaving that end date open. When it comes time to be in effect here in July, in order for it to be an effective binding agreement, you have to have a start and end date. So we'll no longer be leaving that days blank, open, and ended. So that's the first important thing. Don't leave that open-ended. Depending on the buyer that you're working with, maybe you've just met them for the weekend and they only want to commit to you for the weekend. You'd put 2 days in there. If it was a week, you'd put a week in there, but it's got to be specific and it can't be open-ended, okay? The next section is you have to ask your buyer if they're already under contract with another broker, because that will completely change everything. If they're already working with an agent and they've already signed a representation agreement, you need to find out what type of representation agreement they signed, because as we get further down here, there's 2 types of agency. They're either non-exclusive or exclusive. If they've signed an exclusive agreement and then they've come to you, but the other broker is actually technically entitled to compensation, which we'll go through them down here and see. So it's very important that next section in number 2, you need to ask them if they do say, yes, I was working with, Mary Poppins at EXP, they need to disclose that, because another one of the things you'll see down below is if the agreement does cancel while you guys have been showing a property, you have to give them a new form that shows all the interested properties that you were involved in. So that's another thing, part of it. So again, you're going to be asking them, have they been working with Summit? Have they signed a representation agreement? And get all of that information. The next section, number 3, is actually pretty simple, but it's been confusing a lot of people. So you're in this another section for the property to be acquired. You don't have to fill in all of the information there. As a matter of fact, you probably don't want to get too specific. If you're working with a buyer that's looking in Riverside County and they're not going to be moving to a different county, just put in Riverside County. You do have the ability, if your buyer wants, to get very specific down to the cities, property ranges. Maybe they're only looking for single family ranch style homes built in to 80 to 95, whatever. You can get very specific, but if you're very specific and they purchase something outside of that specific, technically you're not entitled to commission unless you get the agreement modified. Absolutely. Yeah. You could put in California. Yeah. I would if it was me, I would leave it pretty broad. Unless you've got some sort of clients that are very particular and they want it to be meticulized there, you have the ability to do it. Let's just say, like in this section here, 3C, Let's say you've met a buyer and, you guys don't know if you're going to work well together, but they want to go out and see 5 properties this weekend. Well, you could always just take your MLS printout of those 5 properties and check that box C, and they're only obligated, for you to represent them on those properties. All right. The next section is the section that is really still blowing my mind, the compensation to brokers, because I can see where this is going to go. Now, you have one of 3 choices. You can either put in a percentage with, maybe an additional fee that goes with that. You could charge a flat fee, or you could do like a schedule compensation services. In one of the trainings I went to, she said, okay, so if you put a lockbox on the property, that's $50. If you open a door, that's $100. If you put a sign on, so she was saying itemize all of these things. And so you could instead have a price list. And then at the end, they go, well, that's, really inconvenient. Let's just charge a flat fee or percentage. The thing here is, you guys, whatever number goes in here, whatever number goes in there, that's the number you're going to get paid. What? So if you put in 1%, and the seller's broker, you decide to go to the seller with an offer and say, we want you to pay my commission, and I want 3%. Well, as part of this, when you're presenting your offer to a seller and you're asking them to pay the compensation, you have to disclose to them on this form that we'll go over what your buyer-broker agreement says. So if your buyer-broker agreement says 1%, you can't ask the seller for more, unless you go back and remodify your buyer-broker agreement. So what I see a lot of potential buyer's agents doing is just trying to secure the buyer and saying, I only charge 0.5%, but I'm going to go to the seller and I'm going to ask the seller to pay my 3% commission. That can't happen. Whatever number is there, that's the number you're making. And it's a little contradictory because down further in this document, there's actually a thing here that says, okay, so if third-party payments have been received and it exceeds the buyer's obligation, the excess amount shall be paid to the broker. That's what's already defaulted in there. And it's been really throwing me off, because if that's in there, well, then obviously you can make more. And when I've questioned this with everybody, that line is pretty much going to be coming out because they're going to be remodifying. As we get closer to July, we're going to have a new buyer-broker agreement. They're going to be removing language of MLS and everything like that. So this is going to change, but it's not going to change drastically. So do you guys have any questions about that?
Real quick, are you scrolling to the right spot on the screen?
Oh, no.
So when you're talking about the compensation, you're referencing 4A12, right?
Correct. Agent. Yeah.
I don't want to be sneaky, but I'm going to be sneaky. But why can't it just put up to 3%?
That's the other thing. You cannot have a range. It's got to be a specific set amount.
Okay. Could we do a modification?
Yeah. And so let's just say you put in 1% on here, and then you present an offer to the seller. You ask for them to pay 3%. Now, remember, on the disclosure that you're going to be requesting compensation for is called the seller's payment to buyer broker. It's a form that's been a part of the new RPA for the past 2 years. It's just that no one's using it. But in there, it's 3 parts. It says, yes, I have a buyer broker agreement. This is what the compensation says. This is what we're going to be asking you to compensate out of it. And it could be partial, it could be all of it, whatever. So if you're putting it on the seller payment to buyer broker disclosure form, you're going to have that modification done prior to writing the contract.
But like if we do it where it's like we put 3%, 2%,
yeah,
we ask the seller to pay for it.
Yes.
Say no go, and then we can modify it for our
yes.
Pay us 1%. Right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. One of the conversations that was had, and which is, I like to have it more like a roundtable like this right now, because everybody's got a ton of questions, different scenarios, lots of questions around open houses and how listing agents are going to do that. We can talk about that as well, because I've got some information. But yes, you can absolutely modify it. And one of the questions that was brought up in one of the trainings I did was like, okay, I'm going to put 1% here. I'm going to go back to the seller and I'm going to ask the seller to pay 3%. Well, then you have to go back to the buyer and remodify the contract. And the scenario was, what if the buyer was short on closing costs? What if they're short to close and they are needing some additional money? They'd already agreed to pay 1%. Now you're saying that the seller is willing to pay, 3%. The buyer may go, I want some of that money. And the buyer has every right to do that when you go open for negotiation. So it's setting, clear expectations right up front and having those conversations of what could happen. You're going to do everything you can to get the seller to pay it or the listing broker to pay it, because that can happen. The listing broker can still compensate the buyer's broker commission via referral. It just can't go through the MLS anymore. It's all going to be negotiated at the time of contract. Okay. You guys have any more questions or scenarios? Yeah.
Just to clarify what you said, so I'm representing my parents. I'm telling, hey, you're only going to pay 1% if you have to pay it out of pocket.
Yeah.
But we're going to write this agreement for 3% in the eventuality that possibly a seller pays.
Yes, and then you'll have to get your buyer broker agreement amended.
And then amend that to the 1%, get you the.
Correct. Yep. Yes.
Let's amend the mid-escrow.
Yeah, it's just be like a normal addendum, just like that. Yeah, I have a feeling addendums are going to be our new favorite thing. Okay, so moving down to your right to compensation, whether you're non-exclusive or exclusive. So the contract, go right here. The contract already defaults to non-exclusive. And I have a feeling that 97% is good right here. Right? Non-exclusive, it already defaults to that. If you're going to have an exclusive representation, you would actually have to check the box. And so we'll go into what the different meanings are of non-exclusive and exclusive. So I'm just going to read it here. I got it bigger so my old eyes could read it. Okay, so in a non-exclusive, compensation is payable only if there was broker involvement. And the broker involvement means what? The buyer physically entered and was shown the property by the broker. A broker showed the property to the buyer virtually, maybe FaceTime or something like that. Broker submitted to seller a signed written offer. The property is introduced to the buyer by the broker or for one that the broker acted on the buyer's behalf, not just emailing a list of properties, okay? So if you've done any of those things to a property, you will be due compensation. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about that? Thank you. Much better. All right. Now, in the exclusive side, you don't have to show them any properties. If they're committing to you for the time period you set up here, it doesn't matter what you've done. If they go out and see a property with Joe Schmo, it doesn't matter if you didn't show them the property, you're due the commission. And so I don't really know. I mean, I'd love to hear the benefits from maybe you guys of why an agent would pick non-exclusive or exclusive, or why a buyer would pick someone to be exclusive. Because all it says here in the exclusive section, if you guys read it, in, 4B2, it says that this agreement shall be exclusive and irrevocable. Broker will devote time and resources to assist the buyer in finding, acquiring the property in the expectation of being paid for broker services. Brokers entitled to compensation if buyer acquires property during the representation period with or without broker involvement, even if another broker is also entitled to be paid for representing the buyer. So like I said, if you and buyer have got an exclusive contract here and they decide to go out and meet up with EXP agent, write an offer, this trumps that and your compensation is secure. Where I see a little, I don't know how anybody's going to keep track of all this, because let's just say you're working with multiple buyers. You've got multiple agreements. You're going out and you're showing them 5 to 6 properties a weekend, and then maybe they ghosted you and you're whatever, it's not proceeding anymore. How are you going to be tracking what properties you showed them, and did it close? Did it close with that buyer? While you were under? So that's going to be a whole other system change that people are going to have to get used to, because
There's an outer shoulder.
yeah, but how would you know if you weren't?
I called you up and go, oh, I bought a house.
Yeah, exactly.
On Instagram.
Exactly. You're going to be stalking people. Property profiles are going to be popping.
Another issue that this one is, if you're going to be showing buyers, you're going to have to ask them if they've signed something
Yep.
to see what kind of contract they signed with the other agent.
Exactly.
Say you show them 10 properties,
Yep.
but the other agent that showed them one property got them to sign this.
Yep.
And now you did all the work, and the other agent gets commission.
Correct.
So we're going to have to ask for copies of this.
Yep. Yeah. And, the chances of buyers remembering what they signed or keeping track of what they signed, it is definitely going to be pretty interesting. Okay. So do you guys have any more questions around the exclusive, non-exclusive?
This includes also the open houses that they send by.
Yeah, pretty much. And so we'll talk about that right now. So when it comes time for open houses, CAR is actually designing a whole new form that you guys are going to get for open houses. And it's basically going to be very similar to what's called the BNA, a buyer non-agency. And so if a buyer comes in and they're not working, and you're asked them, are you working with an agent? And they say no, and they don't want to work with you right now, you can give them information about the house. But when it comes time for discussing things about the property, they need to sign something that shows that you don't have an agency with them. They are on their own, because if they come back and say that you gave them information and there was no agency involved, it could be very bad.
So they are signing a form?
They are.
They weren't. It was just for an open house. It's just you're acting on behalf of the seller to show the property.
Yeah.
So it just like
It's going to be like an open house advisory form. I don't know how they expect everybody to have them printed out or have.
Everybody can keep up with that. If we do them all together, that's 2 of us.
It reminds me of like with the way they were talking about it. You guys remember during COVID times, the PED, how annoying the PED was. You had to get a PED to go into every single house before you could, and everybody had to sign. It was annoying, and then it went away. But I have a feeling it's going to be like that. It's going to be annoying. It's going to be something that's going to have to be done, especially if buyers are not, represented, or they're not interested in using the seller's agent for representation. Okay.
Yeah, it's getting like even what?
Agent. Yeah. And they don't have to. I mean, the buyers don't have to, but then you're limited on what you can discuss with them. And so that's the only thing.
Take seller.
that doesn't do the seller. Maybe just tell us this property. Sorry.
Well, I mean, you can talk to them about the property. It more comes down to negotiations of that's the part that you can't get involved with them in. Yeah. Unless you're willing to represent them, and it'll be interesting to see how that turns out, because the list. One thing I did learn as well: the listing agreements are changing. You know how it states in there right now, the commission can be split out to a broker. There's still going to be something similar to that, because they still want the seller to fully understand that they have the ability to still pay the commission. It just cannot go through the MLS. They're removing all the language about MLS and everything through the listing contract. So that's going to be something that's still on there, disclosing to the seller that you have the ability to pay X amount of dollars or percentage or whatever on the listing agreement, or you're going to be disclosing as the listing broker, like, okay, you're going to pay me 6%, and I'm going to compensate the buyer's broker, 2.5%, 3%, or whatever. Okay. Any more questions about that? Nope. Okay, let's go down into the cancellation section. So in the non-exclusive, the way the contract defaults to, any party can cancel, all right? And as soon as the party receives the cancellation, it's completely terminated. Now, in order for you to get paid if you did show them properties, there's a form you'll be using. You can also use MLS sheets if you've got your buyer to sign the MLS sheets, but the form is called the notice. What is this called? The notice of buyer. Hold on a second. I don't want to mess it up because it's a new one. I'm not even quite fully used to it myself. Just read it. Agent. Oh, there it is. Notice of broker involved properties. So this is a form that's just got like a list of all of the property. It's got like just lines, and you would add in there all of the properties that you showed to the client. You have 5 days to get that to the buyer after a cancellation in order to perhaps receive compensation if for some reason they close on any of those properties. So if they cancel with you and then decide to go maybe to the listing agent after you've already showed them the property, you've got 5 days to get them the list of properties in order to secure it. Now, if you're in an exclusive representation contract, the buyer cannot enter into a new buyer broker for 30 days. So the buyers need to be made aware of that as well.
30 days after cancellation?
Correct.
So something listed.
Yeah, and then similar, like down below in section 4E, the additional broker right to compensation. So you'll want to add in there, like, it's blank. Like your listing period, some people put 90 days after, the transaction cancels, 120 days, but you're going to want to put something in there, because if you leave it blank, then that's 0. And if they go out to the listing agent 10 days afterwards, well, then you're not really owed anything. So make sure you put something in that location in 4E. All right.
And you said 4D is going anyway.
Yeah, from what I understand, because it's bringing too much confusion, because you can't make more than what's in 3A, or I'm sorry, 4A 1, 2, or 3. And in this section here, it states that if there is overcompensation, that it's going to go back to the broker, or you could check the box that it gets credited back to the buyer. Okay. Moving along, we're going to go to page 2. Another new form that you guys will have fun with, it's called the ABCD form. And it's the anticipated broker compensation disclosure. So, and there's a copy of this form in your guys' packet towards the back. But basically, this form is just letting the, let's go to it. Why did I play to that?
The last page.
Yeah, I think my copy I didn't. Oh, I just. Great. Here. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So you're going to be disclosing to the buyer on this form here, which I'll just go so everybody on Zoom can see it. Let's go to the very bottom here. Okay, so you're going to be disclosing to the buyer. The buyers will be signing it, the property address, the date they first shown it, and if any compensation is being offered. Now, right now, this form is set up for the MLS because that's where the compensation is offered. So this form is going to be modified. The source is going to be probably blank because you're going to be communicating with the listing agent. In the MLS, there will be a concessions section. That's not for commission, but you could use that concessions to go towards commission. So this form is going to change, but nonetheless, if you know the seller is going to be offering commission on some property, you're going to have to disclose it to the buyer. Okay.
So that means if we call them, they say that, yes, we're offering such and such.
Yeah. Yeah, and it'll probably be in the source section here on this column over here where it says MLS or CBC or the blank box. It'll probably just put in, listing agent, listing broker. Agent. All right. The only other thing that I find is interesting for the remainder of the buyer broker agreement is actually it's at the end of page 2 from 9A. There's mediation only. There's no arbitration. So buyers are automatically agreeing to go to mediation as opposed to doing any form of arbitration as well. And something that someone pointed out to me that it states in here that let's just say a buyer doesn't pay you. You could take the buyer as long as your commission is under $12,600 or $12,500. You could take them to small claims court. And one of the course instructors that I took this class from, she says that you're going to start to see maybe where people get shady, you can be compensated in many other ways other than money. She was saying that she had a transaction recently where parties were short to close, a piano was brought in, watches were brought in. And so it's just crazy to me to know that if a buyer messes up and they oopsie forgotsies, that they were in a legally binding contract and they go use someone else, and they don't realize that you can still go after them for compensation. You can do that as long as your commission is under $12,500. You can take them to small claims. And so keep that in the back of your mind. But now I just want to open it up to maybe some questions or scenarios that you guys are seeing out there that maybe I can help answer.
So far for the cloning class, do you think there'll be more common for us to ask for like the 3 or 2 and then maybe split it in with our buyer?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when buyers see money on the table and they know that they could potentially have a piece of that money, I think that unless that conversation when you're having your consultations and everything up front, I could see where buyers may go, well, my lender just told me I needed to come up with an extra $5,000 to pay off my credit card. So, I might need some of that concession money. So it's just having that conversation up front that if the seller is compensating you through concessions, make sure that the buyer understands that he's got to come up with that money regardless one way or the other because he's committed to paying for it.
This also says this too, if the acquisition is prevented by default of buyer.
Yeah. I think it's going to be awesome that you guys have got something in writing with buyers now that locks them in. Just like when you list a property, you don't go and just meet with a seller and go, nice to meet you. I'm just going to go do all this marketing and do all this running around and then hope that you get paid at the end of it. No, you've got a binding contract in place that spells out all the terms. It's just going to take some time, I think, for buyers to fully understand why it's a benefit for them to have these signed contracts. Yeah.
Would that be crazy if we opened up the brokerage for the platforms like Affirm and stuff like that? like how people buy shoes or buy things?
Make payments on commission.
Would we be able to do that for our buyers?
Make 5 equal payments.
I think that's going to happen. I think that's going to happen, especially like Zillow and all of those guys. Like they're working on Zillow Mortgage. They did that for a reason. Like there will be interesting ways to do payments and stuff. And I think that as a brokerage, we're going to find our ways. But it has to be a win-win for the agent side. We don't want to just discount our way down profitability. So I feel like if you do that, it puts you at a higher liability. But it's not impossible. I think that will start to happen. But I also think the feds are going to get this thing financed within the loan. They'll structure it. It's totally illegal right now, but I think that they will. They just need it to make the rule and then go to the next step.
Yeah, from what I've read through FHA, through NAR, so if a seller is going to be paying the buyer's broker commission, they're not going to consider that an interested party contribution. The only party that's not really fully on board with it right now is VA. FHA has already come on board and said that they don't consider the seller paying the buyer's broker commission like a traditional interested party contribution, like closing cost credit, because there's got that max threshold of like 6% or whatever. And so, but it'll be interesting to see if VA follows that. So far, they're not, but there's still lots of time. So I know they're going to make adjustments for it in loan guidelines and stuff like that. I'm sure they're going to put a cap on it because they don't want anybody going and charging 6% and then at the close of escrow rebating buyer, maybe some money, because they're always afraid of fraud and stuff like that. So, all right. I didn't want to make it boring. Make it quick, short, and sweet.
I see some other forms in there.
Yes.
The buyer transactional advisory.
Or the standard fonts that we have.
They're part of the buyer broker, but I'll tell you, it's called the BTS. It's like the BIA and the RPA. It's just another advisory. And from what I understand, there's going to be another advisory coming as well with the buyer broker agreement or perhaps with the RPA. And it just discloses all about commission. Commission is negotiable. Commission is not set. It's going to be very heavy on commission advisory. So keep an eye out for that. As I get the new forms, I'll share them with you guys.
Will we allow choice on the ERCC? In other terms, we're going to say, okay, yes, you agree to pay this not, but we're going to negotiate with sorry, another term.
That's a good question. I don't know, but I'll find out, because I'm sure that would put a lot of buyers, because you can always check the box there too for, pursuant to the list. And in that list could be like an advisory or like a disclaimer that says, we can't charge a range, our fee is this, and we're going to do everything to get the seller to pay this. So that might work, but I'll find out for sure, because that's a good question.
And do you know, I heard that this new buyer representation agreement, which will watch set a base in 7 years. It's not gonna go like forever.
I don't know. I mean, the forms are always changing. I imagine as we get after this first change that we're going to have here in June, because the new forms will all come out towards the middle or end of June. I'm sure in another year, there's going to be more tweaks and more changes. And so it'll probably be changed again.
Yeah, I know it was going to be only 7 years. And I was going to get back to like the norm.
Oh, so fun.
Yeah, I will say, so, this buyer broker agreement here was created in the end of 2022. Before that, we used to have 3 different buyer broker agreements, and they're so confusing. Nobody ever knew which one to use. The language was wonky and weird, in my opinion, and so they combined them all into just one, which I think is awesome. It's only 3 pages now. It's a lot easier to read, but yeah, it's going to change again slightly.
So those 3 pages are really all we have to worry about later.
Yeah, and your agency. So when you go into your zip forms or car or whatever, and you pull up BRBC, it's actually 13 pages. It's just the BRBC itself is only 3, but you're going to need to have all the advisories and all of that, stuff that comes with it signed as well.
So when you're at the open houses, do they have to sign this each time, or they just sign that one page?
If it's only good, well, if it's in an open house and they're not looking to be in an agency with you and have no representation, they'll sign basically this open house form or a buyer non-agency. And so you just may have something like that on an iPad that you could just load up real quick and click sign. I'm not sure the logistics on that, because no one's printing off 18 pieces of paper and you're going to come back and scan them all in. Where are you going to scan them to? Like, where are we keeping them? That part, I don't think they fully thought it all the way through, but they know they're dealing with a lot of questions right now, because especially listing agents are very worried that they're going to be bombarded with having to be obligated to answer and service all of these buyers that might be coming in for no compensation, and perhaps jeopardizing themselves and their seller.
Would it be a good idea for the agents to have a DocuSign with this document and the signature section ready to go? And then they can pull that up.
Yeah, like
a just press that button and sign digitally.
Yeah,
that'd be like the most efficient way.
Yeah,
templates.
Yeah.
You just have the template, so we could do that today, though, right?
Well, we don't have the new form though. You can use one and yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when does it come out?
June. Yeah.
So it comes out when it goes live.
Yeah, July is when everything changes, but our forms usually come out mid-June to in June. Same thing in just and that'll give us all.
Three signing sheets. One, this is it, and everybody who walks through that doesn't want an agency with you signs this form. If you say, hey, I'm the open house, and if I like the house, I want to use you. There's this form. I already have an agent. There's this form.
Yeah.
Each one individually, and now it is hey, you have to sign in no matter what.
I mean, that's a good thing for us.
It's actually great.
I just remembered.
I was kind of thinking, like, to me, this is like you go to a dentist's office and you have to sign in every time.
Every time.
Like you get to go in one time, and every other time you go to a dentist's office, you have to sign in. One other thing that I just remembered. So let's say come July, the changes occur. If you have a listing that is not under contract, you're going to have to go back and remodify the listing agreement. There'll be a new modification of terms that basically advises the seller that's removing all the language of the MLS and that the compensation is not going to be offered that way. So as we get closer to that time period, and if we have listings that are not under contract yet, we're going to start to work to get all of those advisories and all of the updated disclosures and everything to your sellers. So be mindful of that because you don't want to get in any trouble there as well.
So all that's really flawed, right?
Yeah, they're working on a new advisory / modification of terms. Yeah.
Okay, so you said something about, obviously listening, so we don't want to go try and scan. So for all of our buyers, what are we doing with these? Like where did those go?
It's basically it's just like if you're writing offers right now, you're storing them somewhere. If the offer's not accepted, you're keeping it in your DocuSign, or if you've got a Google folder. But once you go under contract with the buyer, it'll be part of the compliance file. It'll be required. So just keeping them, somewhere organized in your Google file or Dropbox or whatnot.